And today we're going to be talking about the Dunphy Inquiry with Mark Quinn, who has been following this the whole time. And this was an explosive week because we've been waiting for a long time to hear from the only living witness to this, Constable Joe Smyth, and he actually took the stand this week. So what happened? Let's start with yesterday and then we'll go back.
Sure. Well, of course, this has been probably the most important week of all. When we spoke with Leo Barry before the beginning of the inquiry, he said that testing the credibility of Joe Smyth would be one of the most important things they're going to do this inquiry. So this week is really the week people have been waiting for the most. We actually heard from Joe Smyth for the first time. For a lot of people, the first time they heard his voice even. So it was a big week for him and a big week for people who are following this and care about what happened in this case. Yesterday we actually got a description of the shooting from Joe Smyth. In his own words, he talked about what happened, which was something people had anticipated greatly. We'd heard other versions from other people of what they thought might have happened, but here's the person who was actually there talking about it. So it was an important moment for the inquiry. And he really gave it was interesting because he was very kind of cold and precise in his description of what happened. He's a police officer. He used quite a bit of jargon. It's been 2 years almost since it happened, so you get the feeling that some of it's becoming a bit foggy for him. It's been a while since it happened, so it was interesting to hear his account of it and finally hear that from him.
Right, so he started off 3 days ago, right?
Right.
So, but yesterday was kind of the big day where he took people back to the actual house where Don Dunphy lived in Mitchell's Brook, Easter Sunday 2015. So can you give us a little description about what happened there?
Well, he says that he went to the home. He drove down there on a Sunday, Easter Sunday 2015. When he first got there, actually, he went to Don Dunphy's door, knocked on the door, went to the window, knocked on the window. No one responded, and so he thought, well, no one's here. There was no car there at that point, so he thought Mr. Dunphy must not be here. So he actually went down to a beachy area, he says, by the ocean there, and he tried to make a few phone calls. He tried to call Mr. Dunphy himself. He had some cell numbers for him. Didn't get through to him. Then he thought he'd go and speak with the neighbors. He didn't know at the time that the neighbor was actually Dick Dunphy, the brother of Don Dunphy, and his sister-in-law, Debbie Dunphy. So Smyth spoke with them for some time. He said it was quite a few minutes. He learned more about their history. They had had a tense relationship. You could even say it deteriorated to a bad relationship. At one point, there was a court-ordered peace bond taken out against Don Dunphy to tell him he couldn't have contact with Debbie Dunphy. So Smyth learned all of this, and he also asked if there was a gun in the house. And Dick Dunphy said that his response to him was that he didn't know. So he was going into the house not knowing if there was a gun or not, really. So that was what he learned from them. Then he noticed when he went back out of the house, he noticed a car had returned to the house. There was a black Jeep there. Now he had checked the registration, Don Dunphy's registration before on cars and his license. He wasn't registered to have this car. So I guess he was kind of questioning if maybe Don Dunphy was there with someone else or who owned this car. But he went to the home, he knocked again, and he said after a few moments, Mr. Dunphy did come to the door. They spoke in the driveway for a few minutes, and then Mr. Dunphy invited him in. And then, of course, he went through this whole account of this conversation they had. It started out doing some small talk, he said, essentially. Where are you from? Where'd you grow up? He asked him about he knew he had a history of injury, a workplace injury, where he was crushed by between two vehicles. Don Dunphy was a truck driver, and that happened back in 1984. So they talked about that a bit. And then he said it got increasingly tense.
Right, and they actually played some of the reenactment of what happened in the house, and we are going to play a little bit of that. But just a reminder that I am watching your comments on Facebook, so if you have any questions about the inquiry, about what's coming up, Mark can answer your questions. So just leave a comment in the comment sections below, and we'll get to them as we go on. But we do want to talk about what happened in Don Dunphy's house, and we do have a couple of clips to play for you if you want to set them up.
Yep, and the reenactment, of course, was really interesting because that reenactment was shot just days after it happened, so it was still fresh in Joe Smyth's mind what had happened just a few days earlier in Don Dunphy's home. It's interesting to note that this reenactment actually was the second time it was reenacted. The RCMP, who was investigating, had actually tried to do a reenactment earlier, but had trouble with the recording, so this was a redoing of the reenactment. But it was powerful because it was all still very fresh in Mr. Smyth, in Constable Smyth's mind. And we're going to pick up with a clip here where he talks about his reaction right after he says he saw Don Dunphy lifting a rifle from his right side.
I was getting shot. I was kind of preparing for a bullet, and my instinct was to put my hand out, like a ball was coming at me. And in hindsight, it sounds so stupid because it's going to do nothing. But I did. I put my hand out like this and turned away, and then went. Everything else from here for me is completely instinctual. I drew my firearm. I went directly for my firearm, but I'm also wanting to get out of the room.
So yeah, so that was a piece of video that was shown yesterday, and you can see that there are some other people in the video there. So who else is in that room?
Mostly police investigators, but also you can see a man with a cap on. That's Judge Rich,
Right.
Who was also brought in by the RCMP to oversee the investigation and report on it.
Right, and he's also going to be taking part in this inquiry, is he?
Yes, he'll be a witness,
Right.
and he's been at the inquiry every day. It's interesting because at one point he was actually, there was some discussion whether or not he should be there because he will be a witness,
Right.
and people asked would it be appropriate for a witness to be there for the whole testimony. Of course, at that point, people pointed out that Joe Smyth was there, and the judge kind of shut it down by saying, look, this is an inquiry, not a trial,
Right.
and those concerns aren't really the same at an inquiry as they might be at a trial.
A lot of similarities, though, in the way that it is playing out, other than anyone can watch it.
Yes.
So in that video, he's describing that he saw the rifle.
Right.
He's saying it was next to Don Dunphy's chair.
Chair on his right side is what he's saying. He said he saw it brought up from his right side. And here's what he describes regarding the gun.
I drew my firearm, and the gun is coming towards me, and he's bringing it like from his right, like this, and I still got my hand out, and the only thing I could verbalize was no, and I kept saying no, 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 and I felt like it was a plea for him not to shoot me.
Right, so can you just describe what happened there?
So he's talking there about his reaction to seeing the gun, and he talked about putting his hand up and saying no, and described that. And after that, he talks about how he fired twice. He said he unholstered his gun at the hip, and he shot from low. He says he didn't get into a proper shooting stance because I guess there was adrenaline rush and he wanted to shoot. So he talked about those two shots, but then this next piece of tape, he talks about the last two shots as he's exiting the room.
Right.
Still feel there's a threat to me. I raise and I fire towards his head, and I don't know if that shot hit. I felt like that shot was not on target, like I did not hit him, like it hadn't, to me, it hadn't had any impact. What I had done so far, I had done nothing. He was there, he was still there, and I was still in imminent danger, and that's, but while at the same time, this is all happening so fast. And so that headshot, to me, missed. The center mass shots, I don't know if they had connected or not. And I get to about here, and I'm still punched out, and I shot for his head again. I know that shot connected because I can still see his head move from that shot. And within another instant, I'm out of the room.
So what you're seeing there is RNC Constable Joe Smyth describing what happened when he shot and killed Don Dunphy. One of the questions that have come up, and it was raised by Megan Dunphy, was whether or not Joe Smyth saw a gun or Don Dunphy's stick. So can you explain what happened there and what Megan's concerns were?
Right. So Megan, of course, testified last week, and when she testified, Judge Leo Barry questioned her quite extensively towards the end of her testimony about what her concerns were about this investigation and what happened and what she thinks might have happened. And she suggested that she believes that it's possible that Constable Smyth actually saw her father raising a stick, because he carried a stick with him and he always said it was for protection, and he carried it because he had a license, he was a licensed grower, and he had a prescription for medical marijuana, and he grew marijuana in his home. And he was always afraid, he said, that someone would come and try and steal his marijuana, so he carried this stick for protection. So Megan says she saw him with that stick all the time, and she said it was kept on the right side of his chair. So she says she believes that perhaps what happened was her father lifted the stick, and Constable Smyth mistook it for a gun and shot him. And then she believes it's possible that after the fact, Constable Smyth may have tampered with evidence and put the rifle in the place where it was found in order to make it look like he had shot someone who fired a gun.
Right. So, and did he address that? Was he asked that question at the inquiry?
Yesterday at the inquiry, lawyer Sandra Chater did ask that question. Did you move that gun? Were you certain it was a gun that he was raising? And Smyth was adamant. He said, absolutely, it was a gun that I saw. And he also said that he did not move that gun. He never touched that gun, he said. One of the questions that's coming up a lot now, people are sending us notes here at CBC, of course, is, how come it seems from the police reports, there are no fingerprints on that gun? And the forensic reports say that the stock of the gun was old and porous and it was impossible to lift prints from that gun. But a lot of people are questioning that and wondering why police weren't able to find prints. So that wasn't addressed yet. But we expect when they get to the forensics part of the inquiry, we'll hear more about fingerprints and the gun and where it was placed and all those questions people have still lingering.
Yeah, and we do have another question from Daphne on Facebook. She wants to know, was it addressed why 4 shots were fired? She wants to know why not shoot him in the leg and the arm, and I don't know if you can answer this, but did he speak about the number of times that he shot Don Dunphy?
Yeah. I'll try to answer as best I can, but in that clip that we ran, you see how he describes how he shot 4 shots, and he talked about how he felt the first 3 shots had no effect. So he really wanted. The sad thing about when the police officer, we're told when a police officer makes a decision to fire their gun, they can't shoot to wound because of course that would leave the person perhaps wounded and still able to shoot them. So they're trained to shoot to kill. It sounds harsh, but once they make a decision to fire, they're told that they should shoot for the body mass, which is what he did first. But he felt that those shots hadn't been fatal, and he felt like he described how he believed the gun was still tracking him, and he was afraid that Dunphy would shoot. So he kept shooting until he was certain that Dunphy was dead. And you can hear in that tape, he felt the first 3 shots had no effect, and it wasn't until the 4th shot where he saw the shot actually forced Mr. Dunphy's head to move that he felt he had connected and that it was a fatal shot. So it sounds brutal that he had to keep shooting, but he felt that he was in danger and that he was doing that to save his own life, is what he says. So I think that explains why perhaps 4 shots were shot.
And that's just one unanswered question, because this is one of those stories where people have not stopped asking questions and haven't stopped talking about it since it happened in 2015. One of the questions that keeps coming up is about the interpretation of those tweets that Don Dunphy was said to have sent. Was there any indication of what his interpretation of those tweets were?
Yes, well, on Tuesday, of course, Constable Smyth was asked point blank, what was your interpretation of that tweet? And I guess it's important to say singular tweet because he was sent one tweet. Donna Ivey sent him one tweet. That was a tweet that some described as threatening, some described as a concern. And he said that he had looked at the thread and he understood what the tweet, he believes he understood what the tweet meant, and that he says he did not believe it was a threat. But I think, as both he and Don Ivey said, there was strong language in there. There was talk about, dead people and hurting people. The interpretation of the tweet, I think, in the string is fairly clear. It sounds like he's saying he's talking about 2 MHAs who are already deceased, and he's saying he doesn't want to name them because he doesn't want to hurt people who are in their families who are still alive. But there's another possible interpretation that suggests, that some people suggest he's threatening MHAs who are still living, and perhaps even the Premier. Smyth says that he believes that it wasn't a threat, but he still felt it was worthwhile to go to visit him, to determine what he meant, and perhaps build some rapport with him. He wanted to talk to him about his ongoing complaint about how he'd been handled and dealt with by workers' compensation after his injury in the 80s. So that's why he felt he was justified in going. And
coming off that as well, there was also talk about why he went alone to Don Dunphy's house on Easter Sunday without a uniform. So Did he address that?
He did. He addressed that specifically. And he said he went alone, and his initial thought was he would go alone in plain clothes himself in an unmarked car because he felt the uniform might be intimidating or a symbol of authority that would make Mr. Dunphy uncomfortable. And he said he wanted to go down and try to build rapport, and he thought he'd be more likely to do that, he said, if he were in plain clothes in an unmarked vehicle. It's interesting because before he went down, he did speak with RCMP officers in the area because this was RCMP jurisdiction where Mr. Dunphy lived in Mitchell's Brook. And he did speak with RCMP officers, and he spoke with Constable Adrian Cox, who offered to go with him. He said, I'll come with you. But Joe Smyth says he declined that offer because he felt like it would be better to go alone. He'd be more likely to make Mr. Dunphy comfortable alone. The second thing that came out that was quite interesting is that he did do a background check. He called the RNC Communications Centre, Mr. Smyth did, Constable Smyth did, and he asked for a background check on Don Dunphy. And he says that he wasn't given some crucial information. There was a record that on Mr. Dunphy's report, and it had a caution saying drugs, violence, and that related to charges that were made against Mr. Dunphy back in the past, more than 10 years ago, a drug-related charge, a possession charge, and also an uttering threats charge. And those were on federal records, so they would have been the RCMP records, and he didn't, Constable Smyth didn't ask specifically for those records, so the Communications Centre didn't give him those records. So he says that that was something he would have expected they would have given him without asking, and I guess their thinking was if he didn't ask for them, I'm not going to give them to him. So, but he felt that was the crucial bit of information that may have changed the course of what he did. He said if he had known that, he probably would have brought a second officer, and that may have altered what happened. Of course, we don't know. Two officers may have had the same result, but many people think that two officers could have changed the outcome here.
And we're going to get to a bit more, but just a reminder that we are going to take your questions, and I do see them coming in there. So if you have any questions for Mark, things that you think that he could answer, shoot us a note on our Facebook page just down below on the comment section. But Mark, a big piece of some of the testimony, I guess, from Joe Smyth related to his character and some of his dealings with other people in the past through his work with the RNC. We knew that he would be not criticized, but they are going to take a microscope to his past. What exactly happened?
Yeah, and you're right. Of course, when we spoke with Jerome Kennedy, who's the lawyer representing Mr. Smyth, Constable Smyth, he did say that he expected he would be under a microscope, that his personal and professional lives would be scrutinized. And that happened to a certain extent on Monday. They talked about some things in his past. In 2005, for example, a few years after Constable Smyth had become a police officer, he was vacationing in the British Virgin Islands, and he was charged with damaging property. He says that he was robbed at knife point while he was there, and he was angry. And he said he was also, in his own words, he said he was very intoxicated, and he threw a flower pot and some wood at what he thought was an abandoned school bus, and it was damaged, and he was charged for that. And in the end, the RNC actually reprimanded him, saying he had done something, behavior that was unbecoming a police officer. So there was a result from that. And as well, there was also talk of how many times he had drawn his gun over the course of his career. And he said about 6 times is what he thought, which he believed and argued was a kind of a standard, what you would expect a police officer doing the work he was doing to have done over the course of his career. But they focused on one period in 2007 where over a 6-month period there were 3 use of force reports filed. 2 of them were for times he drew his gun, and one was for a time where he hit someone, he punched someone who was being investigated who wasn't responding. And apparently he stopped hitting him once they realized that the person was hearing impaired. So they talked about that. And of course, at this point, he felt that he had been unfairly perhaps portrayed in a negative light. And he suggested that perhaps they should also talk about his awards.
Yeah, and that's something that was brought up during the whole British Virgin Islands incident, where he specifically said, if you're going to look at some of my, the things that happened in my past, you should also take a look at the positive things that happened. So he asked that the justice take a look at some of his awards, his commendations. How was that received?
Well, they agreed. They agreed that those are things that should be looked at as well. So Sandra Chater, the lawyer, also talked about how he had received commendations for some of the investigations he was involved in. And he actually won a life-saving award because he gave someone the Heimlich maneuver. I'm not sure what you call it anymore. I think we changed the name, but he did give someone the Heimlich maneuver and save their life, and he was awarded for that. So there are some good things as well, obviously, in his career, his long career.
Now, this inquiry is set to last weeks, right?
Yes.
So are there any questions that are outstanding that you think will be addressed during cross-examination? Because if you remember, he's just answering questions now from the commission lawyer. He still hasn't been cross-examined by Megan Dunphy's lawyer. So what questions do you think will come up now in the next week?
Well, I think, for example, I think there will be questions when the forensics are examined about this gun in particular and the fingerprints. People want to know about that, and we've been asked about that a few times, and we can't really answer that question yet, but I think that will come up in the inquiry. And of course, there were, when he spoke and was asked questions, his memory now of what happened and what he said when he first spoke with police, sometimes there were, I don't know if there are inconsistencies, but there's differences. And I think that the cross-examining lawyers will focus in on those and try to figure out, what happened. And I think, it's going to be crucial, of course, his cross-examination, because as Leo Barry said, his credibility is key because he's the only person alive who witnessed what happened. So I think those will be interesting days when he's cross-examined.
So he will be back on the stand on Monday, is that
That's
correct?
right, yeah. He's back on Monday because Thursday and Friday this week, people have other commitments, so that's not happening this week. But Monday, Constable Smyth is back on the stand. It's not clear how long he'll be back on for. It probably will be some time because there are a number of lawyers, I imagine, who want to speak with him. That could take time. A lot of those lawyers are very experienced at cross-examining. Robert Simmons is representing Megan Dunphy, and Aaron Breen is also representing Megan Dunphy. And they have a lot of court experience cross-examining witnesses, so I imagine they'll do a thorough job.
And Mark, how do you feel being in the inquiry? You're there day in, day out. How was the mood when he first walked up and he first, I guess, took the stand, for lack of a better word? Was it tense? Was Megan Dunphy watching this? What was the reaction like?
Yeah, people, I mean, when he got on the stand, of course, people thought, well, this is it. This is the moment everyone's been waiting for. Many people who don't know him, hadn't heard his voice even before. So people were highly anticipating his testimony, and it was a charged moment, of course. People were watching Megan. Megan's been very, even on the stand, she was very calm and collected. And she, even Leo Barry commented on what a forceful witness she was and what a good job she did. I think he described it. She really stood her own. I mean, it was an intimidating thing to be in front of a panel of lawyers and a judge. And of course, she was emotional at one point when she spoke about her father raising her from the age of 3 after her mother died, and how good he was to her. But for the most part, she was very composed. And she, when you watch her when Constable Smyth was testifying, she was very composed and showed very little emotion. But she's been watching it. You can tell she's paying close attention to everything. And she's been there every day, as has Constable Smyth. So it's been very interesting to be there because all the players are there, and there's a lot of lawyers who have a lot of experience who are there as well. So it's been something to watch, and there's a lot more to come.
Yeah, and there is a lot more to come, and we will be following it. And Mark, you will be at the inquiry. You're going to continue to cover it. Lots and lots and lots of stuff left to come, and a lot of policy, social media, taking a dig at some of that stuff as well.
Right.
So what else will happen after Joe Smyth is finished?
Well, I think a lot of people are anxious to see Paul Davis take the stand. He's the former premier who Joe Smyth's job was to help protect. And so people want to know his role. They want to ask him, what did he know, when, those sort of questions. I mean, he's maintained all along that he didn't know anything about it until after it happened. But it'd be interesting to hear his testimony. As well, Judge Rich has been vocal. We've heard from him a few times. And his report, it's the shortest report, 21 pages compared to some of the longer reports. But it's the one report that was very critical of the investigation. And what happened, and so it'll be interesting to hear what he has to say. There was an interesting moment when one of the lawyers suggested, he shouldn't be there, but he has been there for the whole inquiry so far, and that will be, I think, one of the highlights as well. And then the forensics, I think, will be interesting because people have a lot of questions. In lieu of anyone else being a witness, if we only have the one witness who was there, who was also the shooter, the forensics are the other key evidence in this, and we'll hear a lot about that, I'm sure.
Yeah, lots and lots and lots of questions left to answer. Mark, thank you so much for
you.
taking us through all this.